Aloha, everybody. Thanks for joining another Draw the Law with me, Ryan K. Hugh, an attorney with Hugh and Bordenave, a Honolulu-based law firm doing transactional compliance and litigation work, as well as personal injury. So in Draw the Law, what I'm going to do is going to try and take an abstract business law concept or a law, basically, and try and sketch it out to kind of help you understand. Please go ahead and submit questions and see if I can do a successful job in sketching out the law and helping you understand a little bit about business law. So what's today's topic? Great questions. What is a nonprofit? How do I form a nonprofit? I love alliterations, and for me, November is Nonprofit November. So I do a lot of talks, webinars, or blog posts about nonprofit law information. So let's get right to it into what is a nonprofit, or how do I form a nonprofit. So a nonprofit is usually referring to a corporation. The only difference that separates a for-profit corporation, let's just say this one is for-profit, versus, and just to distinguish that, we'll just make this one a little bit segmented. So this is the nonprofit one, is that the money's made, the profit, that's right, nonprofits can make money, is that in the nonprofit situation is that this money doesn't go out to shareholders, directors, or people who control the nonprofit. It goes for the purpose at which the nonprofit was created. Contrasting that with a corporation for profit is that dividends are paid out to shareholders. You don't have this scenario, the payment of profit out to shareholders in a nonprofit. The goal of the money is to go out to, to other purpose, usually a charitable purpose. So education, helping out kids, helping out animals. There's any number of things in terms of a charitable purpose that a nonprofit usually tends to exist in terms of what its goals are. The main thing to understand, the term nonprofit is exactly that, is that the monies being made by the nonprofit corporation are not going to benefit any one person in particular in terms of people who have control. So incorporators, directors, officers. There aren't really any owners of a nonprofit corporation. There may be people who run it, and there's a board of directors, but there's no such thing as like a shareholder situation where someone is profiting from the business entity making money. So this is the thing to understand about the differences. Okay, so how do I go about getting one or forming one of these? Well, basically, there are several requirements, and nonprofit corporations, similar to LLCs and for-profit corporations, are once again made at the state level. So you're going to need articles, usually referred to as articles of incorporation. You're going to need bylaws. And in general, because of that nonprofit situation that I just talked about, you're probably going to want to have several policies and procedures in place to kind of control the behaviors of directors. So first things first is generally an incorporator takes the articles of incorporation and files them with the government, namely some type of state office. And here in Hawaii, we have the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, the DCCA. We file our articles of incorporation with the DCCA Business Registration Office. Other states, usually you'll see that they'll use a Secretary of State is responsible for getting the articles of incorporation. So usually once that's done, or right around it, is the group of people, usually some set of directors, gets together, discusses things amongst themselves, and then creates another document, the bylaws. So this second step, bylaws, where directors are talking it out and they have bylaws. Those are things like controlling how voting happens, how meetings are attended, all that kind of good stuff of governing the corporation, the nonprofit corporation, and how directors and officers preside. Are you going to just have a president and secretary and treasurer, or are you going to have a president-elect, and several vice presidents, committees? All those kind of things go into bylaws. Now, notice that in terms of this is that I haven't really talked about, well, how do you deal with the nonprofit status? And, how do we deal with directors pocketing money or trying to profit from a nonprofit, which they're not supposed to be doing? So a lot of times what organizations will do is they're setting things up is have their directors, their presidents, secretaries, treasurers, anybody who's handling the organization or dealing with the organization sign off on basically intake documents to join the board of directors. And usually a part of that is some type of conflict of interest policy. In this document, basically it says is that this is how the organization is going to resolve conflicts of interest in terms of what we call self-dealing. And the whole goal is to avoid what we call private inurement. Private inurement is again, when these individuals who control the nonprofit corporation are trying to maneuver or try and get at the money for them to profit from it. And so usually these conflicts of interest policies basically have a set of ways for the board to resolve that, hey, this director owns a store or a supply shop that could be beneficial to our nonprofit corporation, but they're also a director. So how do we resolve that relationship that they're on the board of directors, but they're also a private owner owning a separate business wanting to do business with the nonprofit corporation? Why is all this important in terms of this policy situation and the way the board conducts itself under its bylaws? Well, after formation, which is usually just the beginning part, right again, so the question is how to form is articles, bylaws, and policies. And this is where people get a lot of confusion in terms of nonprofit in that term, is once the corporation is done forming, and that's all we basically need, and that's why we want those policies in place. You have articles, you have bylaws, and you have policies. And maybe you've had a couple of meetings, and then you have minutes, right, about talking about where you're going to go with your nonprofit. You're going to take all that and you're going to file it with the IRS. And this is the part where people don't understand a lot, and they confuse the word tax exemption with nonprofit. This is not the case. Nonprofit does not mean tax exemption. This is something completely different, which we'll probably talk about in a later Draw the Law. But this tax exemption is granted by the IRS in exchange for this information. And usually we have several forms. So for a 501c3, we usually file a Form 1023. For something like a 501c4, 501c4, we file a 1024. So there's different forms, and there's also a number of different 501cs, and all of them have tax exemption statuses. But the information to build that and send that up to the IRS differs from each organization. So just understand the main thing here is nonprofit does not equate tax exemption. And that will go a long way in helping you understand the situation. You form the nonprofit corporation at the state level. So again, form nonprofit corporation at the state level. One, so state. You're going to do all that documents. And main thing is making sure profit doesn't go into private hands. Not private benefit. But once you're formed at the state level, you have your documents, those articles, bylaws, and policies. And step 3 is when you apply for tax exemption. So that's everything in a nutshell in terms of answering about what is a nonprofit, how do you form one, and then also a little bit more about, yeah, it's relatively easy to form the nonprofit corporation, but what most people want to go for is this tax exemption status, which is found under the 501c code of the IRS. So that's things in a nutshell. Thanks for joining me. I hope you find this helpful. Again, main thing I want you to get is the nonprofit thing is don't make sure the profit doesn't benefit private people who control the organization. And the next thing is do not equate nonprofit with tax exemption. If you have any questions, ideas for our next topic, go ahead and contact us or send an email, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and as well as you can find us on LinkedIn. And then if you look for hughbordenave.com, that's also a website where there'll be blog posts and other resources. Thanks for joining me.